Before Sam Raimi became synonymous with Spider-Man, he created an original superhero that featured underground studio break-ins, composer cameos throwing water buckets, and actors breaking bones on construction sets without safety wires. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Darkman. Fact 1. Secret studio break-in restored the film. Most moviegoers who watched Darkman in theaters during the summer of 1990 had no idea they were seeing a version of the film that technically shouldn't have existed. Just 48 hours before the final cut was supposed to be delivered to theaters, director Sam Raimi and his team pulled off what can only be described as a cinematic heist against their own studio. The trouble started when Universal Studios decided they didn't understand the film that Raimi had created. After multiple test screenings where audience scores kept getting lower and lower, studio executives made the decision to cut out significant portions of the movie, removing about 10 minutes of scenes that Raimi considered essential to the story. The studio wanted a shorter, more commercial version that they believed would test better with audiences, but Raimi and his producer Robert Tappert were devastated by these changes. According to Tappert, the studio had essentially told them there was nothing that could be done to save the picture in its current form. But rather than accept defeat, Raimi's team came up with a desperate plan. Over a single weekend, just hours before the final cut was scheduled to be locked and sent for distribution, Raimi, Tappert, and longtime editor Bob Murawski secretly returned to the studio facilities. Working through the night, they restored the deleted scenes back into the film, creating what was essentially Raimi's director's cut without permission from Universal. They had the new version mastered and prints made before anyone at the studio realized what had happened. By Monday morning, when Universal executives discovered the deception, it was too late to change anything. The negative had already been cut, the sound had been mixed, and critic screenings were scheduled to begin within hours. Studio executives were reportedly outraged by this act of rebellion, but since the film was already being shipped to theaters, they had no choice but to release Raimi's unauthorized version. This rogue edit became the theatrical release that audiences saw. Fact 2. Danny Elfman's bizarre on-set cameo. One of the most unexpected cameos in Darkman happens so quickly that most viewers miss it entirely, but it involves the film's composer in a completely absurd situation. When Liam Neeson's burned and bandaged character stumbles out of an alley early in the movie and suddenly gets drenched by a bucket of water thrown from off-screen, the person behind that splash was none other than Danny Elfman, who had composed the film's dramatic orchestral score. This bizarre moment came about during Elfman's very first visit to the Darkman set, when he was still interviewing for the job of creating the movie's music. Elfman had never met director Sam Raimi before and was coming to the production to discuss whether he would be the right fit for scoring the film. At this point in 1990, Elfman was already well known in Hollywood for his work on Tim Burton's Batman the previous year, so landing him for Darkman was a significant get for Raimi. According to Elfman himself, the moment he arrived on set, Raimi immediately introduced himself and told the composer that he loved his previous work and definitely wanted him to score Darkman. But instead of sitting down for a traditional meeting or discussion about the film's musical needs, Raimi had a much more hands-on introduction in mind for his new composer. Raimi felt that Elfman should be more directly involved in the actual production process, so he handed the surprised composer a bucket full of water and asked him to throw it at Liam Neeson for the scene they were currently filming. Elfman found himself participating in the movie-making process in the most literal way possible, drenching the lead actor as the cameras rolled. This impromptu participation marked the beginning of what would become a long creative partnership between Raimi and Elfman, who would go on to collaborate on multiple films including the Spider-Man trilogy. Fact 3. Bruce Campbell's Final Shemp Easter egg. The very last scene of Darkman contains one of the most insider references in movie history, featuring Bruce Campbell in a cameo that's credited with a term that only true Sam Raimi fans would understand. In the film's final moments, when Darkman uses his synthetic skin technology to disguise himself and blend into a crowd, the person actually wearing that final mask is Campbell himself, listed in the credits as Final Shemp. This unusual credit refers to a piece of Hollywood history that goes back to the 1950s and the Three Stooges comedy team. When Stooge member Shemp Howard died of a heart attack in 1955, the remaining Stooges still had 4 short films left to complete under their contract with Columbia Pictures. To finish these films, they used a stand-in named Joe Palma to appear as Shemp in new scenes, but only showed him from behind or with his face obscured. Palma became known as the original Fake Shemp. Sam Raimi, who was a huge Three Stooges fan, borrowed this term during the making of his first film, The Evil Dead. When most of his cast and crew abandoned the project after production went way over schedule, Raimi was forced to use himself and his loyal friends, including Campbell, as stand-ins for missing actors, and he started calling these replacements fake Shemps. The term stuck and became a running joke in all of Raimi's future productions. Campbell's appearance as the Final Shemp in Darkman was actually a consolation prize of sorts. Raimi had originally wanted his longtime friend and collaborator to play the lead role of Peyton Westlake, but Universal Studios insisted they needed a more bankable star and cast Liam Neeson instead. As Campbell himself later explained, he wasn't considered enough of an acting commodity for Universal at the time, so Raimi threw him this bone by letting him technically be Darkman in the movie's final shot. Fact 4. Colin Friel's real femur break. The climactic scenes of Darkman that take place on a towering construction site were filmed using a real 3-story set, and the dangers of shooting on this massive structure turned out to be very real for Australian actor Colin Friels, who played the villainous developer Louis Strack Jr. During the filming of these final action sequences, Friels actually fell from the top of the construction set and suffered a serious injury that could have ended his involvement in the movie entirely. The accident happened because the production was operating on a relatively tight budget for a major studio film, which meant that safety measures that would be standard on bigger productions were often not available. Many of the actors performing stunts on the 3-story construction set were working without safety wires or harnesses, relying instead on careful choreography and professional stunt coordination to keep them safe during the elaborate fight scenes and chase sequences. When Friels took his fall from the top level of the set, he broke his femur, which is the large bone that runs from the hip to the knee and is considered one of the most serious bone breaks a person can suffer. A broken femur typically requires immediate medical attention and a lengthy recovery period. And most actors would have been written out of the remaining scenes or replaced with a stunt double for the rest of filming. However, Friels demonstrated remarkable dedication to the production by returning to the set as soon as he was released from the hospital. Despite having a broken leg bone that would normally keep someone immobilized for weeks or months, he came back to finish his scenes and complete his role as the corrupt businessman who serves as one of the film's main antagonists. His commitment to seeing the project through, even after suffering such a painful injury, became part of the movie's production legend and showed the kind of professional determination that helped make Darkman the cult classic it eventually became. Fact 5. The naked gold coin scene. One of the most bizarre scenes ever filmed for Darkman never made it into theaters because test audiences found it so deeply uncomfortable that the studio demanded its removal, even though making viewers uncomfortable was exactly what the filmmakers intended. The deleted scene featured Colin Friel's character, Louis Strack Jr. in his bedroom, engaging in behavior that was designed to show just how mentally unhinged the corrupt developer really was beneath his polished businessman exterior. The scene began with Strack sitting on his bed wearing only a towel, picking up a large box filled with gold coins and carefully placing them all over his bed. The sequence was meant to reveal the character's obsession with wealth and power in the most literal and disturbing way possible, showing how his greed had consumed him to the point where money had become a physical obsession rather than just a means to an end. After spreading the coins across his bed, Strack would then remove his towel completely and jump onto the bed, writhing around naked on top of the gold coins in what could only be described as a state of ecstasy. The scene was intended to be deeply unsettling and to make audiences realize that this character was far more psychologically damaged than his smooth public persona suggested, essentially revealing him as someone who was completely untrustworthy and dangerous. According to Bruce Campbell, who was involved in the production, this scene was specifically designed to show that Strack was really messed up in the head and to make sure that audiences would no longer trust him as a character. The filmmakers wanted viewers to understand that beneath his respectable appearance, he was fundamentally broken and corrupt in ways that went far beyond simple business dealings. However, when the scene was shown to test audiences, their reactions were so strong and negative that Universal Studios insisted it be cut from the final version, completely missing the point that making people uncomfortable was the entire purpose of including such a disturbing character moment. Fact 6. Julia Roberts' heartbreak casting. Universal Studios had their sights set on Julia Roberts to play Julie Hastings, the love interest in Darkman, and from a business standpoint, it made perfect sense, since Roberts was quickly becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars following her breakout role in Pretty Woman. However, the casting process became incredibly complicated due to personal circumstances that nobody at the studio had anticipated when they first approached the actress about the role. The problem was that Roberts had recently been in a brief romantic relationship with Liam Neeson, who had already been cast as the lead character Peyton Westlake. The two actors had dated for a short period, but their relationship had ended just before the Darkman audition process began, leaving both of them in the awkward position of having to work together professionally while dealing with the emotional aftermath of their personal breakup. Despite the uncomfortable situation, Roberts and Neeson both agreed to go through with an audition together, and according to those who witnessed it, they actually demonstrated strong professional chemistry during their read-through. Both actors behaved cordially and professionally throughout the audition process, showing that they could potentially work together despite their recent romantic history, and that their personal feelings wouldn't necessarily interfere with their ability to portray convincing characters on screen. However, after the audition was completed, Roberts made the decision that the emotional situation was simply too difficult for her to handle. She felt that working so closely with Neeson so soon after their relationship had ended would be too awkward and potentially too painful, especially given that they would need to perform romantic scenes together as part of the movie's plot. Roberts had her agent politely decline the offer from Universal, explaining that she felt uncomfortable taking on a role that would require such intimate professional collaboration with her recent ex-boyfriend. The role eventually went to Frances McDormand, who brought her own unique interpretation to the character and helped create the final version of Darkman that audiences saw in theaters. Fact 7. Campbell voiced Neeson's screams. Bruce Campbell's involvement in Darkman went far beyond his brief on-screen appearance at the end of the film, as he actually provided significant voice work throughout the entire movie that most viewers never realize they're hearing. During the post-production process, Campbell spent considerable time in recording studios doing what's called ADR work, which stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement, where actors record new dialogue or sound effects to replace or enhance what was captured during filming. One of Campbell's most notable voice contributions was providing the death screams for various characters who fall to their deaths during the movie's action sequences. When villains or other characters plummet from buildings or meet other violent ends, the agonized screams that audiences hear are often Campbell's voice rather than the original actors, giving these moments a distinctive vocal quality that fans of Campbell's other work might recognize if they listen carefully enough. Even more surprisingly, Campbell also dubbed over some of Liam Neeson's dialogue as Darkman, including one of the film's most emotionally charged moments. When Darkman cries out "Julie" in a particularly dramatic scene, the voice that audiences hear is actually Campbell's rather than Neeson's, meaning that Campbell was literally speaking as the title character in one of the movie's key emotional beats. Campbell also provided additional voice work for the television version of the film, where he dubbed over some of Neeson's more colorful language to make the movie suitable for broadcast standards. This meant that when Darkman was edited for television, viewers were hearing Campbell's voice delivering cleaner versions of lines that Neeson had originally performed with stronger language. This extensive voice work represented another way that Sam Raimi found to include his longtime friend and collaborator in the production, even though Universal Studios had prevented Campbell from playing the lead role. Through all this behind-the-scenes vocal work, Campbell became an integral part of Darkman's audio landscape, contributing to the film's sound design in ways that audiences would never suspect. Fact 8. The Coen brothers' car crash cameo. During one of Darkman's most spectacular action sequences, when the title character is hanging from a helicopter and being dragged through the streets of the city, he gets slammed into by a beige car in what appears to be just another dangerous stunt. However, this particular car crash contains multiple layers of insider references that only the most dedicated film fans would ever notice, involving both Sam Raimi's personal obsessions and his friendships with other famous directors. The car that hits Darkman during this helicopter chase scene is actually Sam Raimi's own personal vehicle, a Delta 88 Oldsmobile, that the director has managed to work into almost every single one of his films as a kind of personal trademark. Raimi has an unusual attachment to this particular car model and has made it a running joke throughout his career to find ways to include Delta 88s in his movies, whether as background vehicles, important plot elements, or in this case, as an actual obstacle that the hero has to deal with during an action scene. But the car itself isn't the only Easter egg hidden in this moment, because if viewers look carefully at who's driving the vehicle, they can catch a glimpse of Joel and Ethan Coen, the famous directing duo behind films like Fargo and The Big Lebowski. The Coen brothers appear briefly in the front seats of the Oldsmobile, and their faces can be seen for just a moment as they scream in terror right before their car collides with the dangling Darkman. This cameo happened because the Coen brothers were close personal friends of Sam Raimi, and they had actually helped out with some uncredited script work on Darkman earlier in the production process. Joel Coen was also married to Frances McDormand, who played the female lead in the film, so the brothers were already connected to the production in multiple ways. Their appearance as the terrified drivers of Raimi's signature car became one of the most obscure but delightful cameos in the entire movie, combining Raimi's love for his car with his friendship with two of cinema's most respected filmmakers. Fact 9. Frances McDormand called her role a bimbo. Frances McDormand's casting in Darkman represents one of the most surprising career choices made by an actress who would later become known as one of cinema's most respected dramatic performers. McDormand herself candidly described her character Julie Hastings as a bimbo, and she took on this role very deliberately as a strategic career move to break out of the typecasting that was limiting her opportunities in Hollywood at the time. By 1990, McDormand had already established herself as a serious dramatic actress through her work in smaller, independent films. But this reputation was actually working against her in some ways. Casting directors and producers had begun to see her primarily as a character actress who was best suited for supporting roles in serious dramas rather than as someone who could handle leading lady parts in bigger commercial films. McDormand recognized that playing the traditional love interest in a superhero action movie would show a completely different side of her acting abilities and prove that she could handle the kind of mainstream romantic roles that were typically given to more conventionally glamorous actresses. The role of Julie Hastings was essentially the classic girlfriend character who serves as the emotional anchor for the hero, which was very different from the complex, quirky characters that McDormand usually played. Her connection to the project came about partly through her personal relationships within the film industry. McDormand was married to Joel Coen, one half of the famous Coen brothers directing team, and both Joel and his brother Ethan were close friends with Sam Raimi. In fact, at the time of Darkman's production, McDormand, both Coen brothers, and Raimi were all living together, which made it easy for her to get an audition for the role. McDormand's willingness to take on what she openly acknowledged was a less intellectually challenging role demonstrated her understanding of how Hollywood worked and her determination to expand her career opportunities by showing producers and directors that she could successfully handle different types of characters beyond just quirky supporting parts. Fact 10. Recycled Spider-Man footage connection. Sam Raimi has always been known for his creative visual style and his willingness to reuse elements from his earlier films, but one of the most surprising examples of this recycling happened 12 years after Darkman was released, when Raimi directed his first Spider-Man movie in 2002. Sharp-eyed viewers who had seen both films might have noticed something familiar about some of the visual effects used during Spider-Man's transformation scenes, and they would have been absolutely correct in thinking they had seen those images before. In Darkman, whenever the title character experiences his psychological freakouts caused by his damaged nervous system, the audience sees trippy, colorful animated sequences that are meant to represent his nerve endings firing in chaotic patterns. These psychedelic visual effects were created specifically for Darkman and were designed to show the internal chaos happening inside the character's mind and body as he struggles with the side effects of his experimental medical treatment. When Raimi was working on Spider-Man over a decade later, he decided to reuse this animated footage from Darkman during the scenes where Peter Parker is undergoing his transformation after being bitten by the radioactive spider. However, rather than simply copying the footage exactly as it appeared in the earlier film, Raimi and his visual effects team digitally altered the original animation to better fit the Spider-Man story. The most significant change they made was adding computer-generated spiders to the nerve-ending animation, so that the psychedelic patterns now included small CGI spiders crawling through the firing neurons. They also changed the color scheme of the original footage to make it look different enough that casual viewers wouldn't immediately recognize it as recycled material from the earlier film. This creative reuse allowed Raimi to maintain visual continuity with his own directorial style, while also saving time and money on creating entirely new animated sequences for Spider-Man's transformation scenes, proving that even successful Hollywood directors find ways to recycle their own work when it makes sense for the story. Fact 11. The Phoenix Society Research Method. Liam Neeson's portrayal of Peyton Westlake in Darkman carries an emotional authenticity that goes far beyond what most actors bring to superhero roles, and this depth came from Neeson's dedication to understanding the real psychological challenges faced by people who have survived severe burn injuries. Rather than simply relying on the script or his imagination to portray a character dealing with such traumatic physical changes, Neeson took the initiative to reach out to actual burn survivors and the organizations that support them. The actor contacted the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, which is a real organization that provides emotional and social support to people who have been severely burned and are trying to adjust to life after their injuries. This organization helps burn survivors deal with the complex psychological challenges that come with major physical disfigurement, including issues with self-image, social interaction, and the emotional trauma that often accompanies such life-changing injuries. Through his contact with the Phoenix Society, Neeson was able to learn about the genuine struggles that burn survivors face when they try to re-enter society after their accidents. He discovered that the physical pain of burns is often just the beginning of a much longer journey that involves rebuilding one's sense of identity and finding ways to connect with other people despite dramatic changes in appearance. This research gave Neeson insights into the internal emotional landscape of someone who has been through such a traumatic experience, allowing him to bring a level of psychological realism to the role that elevated Darkman above typical comic book character portrayals. The operatic, tragic quality that Neeson brought to the character was informed by his understanding of real human suffering and resilience, rather than just the fictional elements of the superhero story. Neeson's commitment to this research process demonstrated his approach to acting as a serious craft that requires understanding the human experiences behind even fantastical characters, helping to ground the movie's more outlandish elements in genuine emotional truth. Fact 12. John Landis and Jenny Agutter's horror reunion. The hospital scenes in Darkman feature a very special reunion between two people who had worked together on one of the most famous horror movies of the 1980s, and their appearance in Sam Raimi's film represents a deliberate nod to the horror genre that inspired much of Darkman's tone and style. Director John Landis and actress Jenny Agutter both appear as burn ward doctors treating Liam Neeson's character after his laboratory accident, bringing together the creative team behind An American Werewolf in London in a completely different context. John Landis had directed An American Werewolf in London in 1981, a groundbreaking horror comedy that became famous for its innovative special effects and transformation sequences, while Jenny Agutter had played the female lead as the American tourist's love interest, who tries to help him deal with his lycanthropic curse. Their collaboration on that film had been particularly notable because it combined horror elements with genuine emotional storytelling, much like what Raimi was attempting to achieve with Darkman. In the burn ward scenes, Landis appears as one of the doctors examining Neeson's severely injured character, while Agutter delivers medical dialogue as another physician involved in his treatment. Interestingly, while Landis receives proper credit for his cameo appearance, Agutter goes completely uncredited in the final film, making her appearance even more of an insider Easter egg for viewers who recognize her from her previous work. The hospital sequence also features another cameo that connects to the Raimi family, as co-writer Ivan Raimi, who is Sam Raimi's brother, appears as yet another doctor in the same scenes. Ivan Raimi is easy to spot for viewers who know what to look for, since he bears a strong physical resemblance to his more famous filmmaker brother and appears prominently in several shots during the medical examination scenes. This gathering of horror movie talent in the burn ward scenes reflects Sam Raimi's deep appreciation for the genre that had influenced his own filmmaking style, and his desire to pay tribute to the directors and actors who had inspired his approach to combining horror elements with character-driven storytelling. Fact 13. The missing shadow rights. The entire existence of Darkman as a character and as a movie can be traced back to one of Hollywood's most common problems: a filmmaker who couldn't get the rights to make the movie he actually wanted to create. Sam Raimi had originally set his sights on directing a film adaptation of The Shadow, the classic Pulp Fiction character who had been popular in radio shows, novels, and comic books since the 1930s, but his plans were completely derailed when he discovered that he couldn't secure the legal rights to use the character. The Shadow was particularly appealing to Raimi because the character represented everything he loved about the mysterious, dark heroes from classic entertainment, with his ability to cloud men's minds, his dramatic black cape and hat, and his haunting laugh that struck fear into criminals. Raimi was also a huge fan of comic books and pulp fiction, so adapting The Shadow seemed like a perfect way for him to bring his love of these genres to the big screen while working with a character that already had decades of established mythology and fan recognition. However, when Raimi approached the rights holders about making a Shadow movie, he discovered that another filmmaker was already planning to adapt the character, which meant that his version would never get made. Rather than simply giving up on the project entirely, Raimi decided to create his own original character that would capture the same dark, mysterious qualities that had attracted him to The Shadow in the first place. Working from a short story that he had written himself, Raimi developed Darkman as a character who combined the shadowy, vengeful nature of classic pulp heroes with elements borrowed from the universal horror films of the 1930s and 40s. These old monster movies, featuring characters like Frankenstein's monster, the Phantom of the Opera, and the Invisible Man, had always fascinated Raimi with their tragic heroes who were both frightening and sympathetic. The result was a completely original superhero who had never appeared in any comic books, radio shows, or previous movies, making Darkman one of the rare major studio films to feature a brand new character rather than adapting existing source material. Fact 14. 12 drafts and a nervous breakdown. The making of Darkman was plagued by an unusually difficult and stressful production process that pushed several key crew members to their breaking points, with the screenplay alone going through an exhausting 12 different drafts before anyone was satisfied with the final version. This extensive rewriting process was necessary because Sam Raimi was determined to explore the psychological journey of his main character in a way that would give emotional depth to what could have easily been just another action movie about a vengeful superhero. Raimi explained that he wanted to trace the complete transformation of Peyton Westlake from a sympathetic and sincere scientist at the beginning of the story into a vengeful man committing violent acts against his enemies in the middle, and finally, into someone who had found a kind of peace with his new identity as Darkman by the end. Creating a character arc that would feel believable and emotionally satisfying while also delivering the action sequences that audiences expected required constant refinement of the script. The writing process became so grueling that it took a serious toll on everyone involved in the production, and the stress didn't end once filming was completed. During the post-production phase, when the movie was being edited together, the pressure reportedly became so intense that the film's editor allegedly suffered a nervous breakdown and had to leave the project entirely, forcing the production team to find a replacement editor to finish putting the movie together. Meanwhile, Sam Raimi and the producers were engaged in lengthy battles with Universal Studios over the final cut of the film, with disagreements about everything from the pacing of certain scenes to which moments should be included or removed from the theatrical version. These post-production conflicts created additional stress for everyone involved and contributed to an atmosphere where the creative process became more about survival than artistic expression. The combination of script problems, editing difficulties, and studio interference made Darkman one of the most challenging films that Raimi had worked on up to that point in his career, though the final result proved that all the struggle had been worthwhile. Fact 15. Bill Paxton's friend recommendation backfire. One of the most ironic casting stories in Hollywood history involves Bill Paxton accidentally talking himself out of a role that he desperately wanted by being too generous with information he shared with a friend. Paxton had been among the actors being considered for the lead role of Peyton Westlake in Darkman, and he was excited about the possibility of landing what would have been a major career breakthrough for him as a leading man in a big studio superhero film. At the time that Darkman was being cast, both Paxton and Liam Neeson were working actors who had appeared in supporting roles in various films but hadn't yet become major stars. Paxton had built a reputation for playing memorable character roles in movies like Aliens and Near Dark, while Neeson had done mostly dramatic work in smaller films and was not yet the action star he would later become after movies like Taken made him famous decades later. When Paxton learned about the Darkman auditions, he was enthusiastic enough about the opportunity that he shared the information with his friend Liam Neeson, apparently not considering that Neeson might also be interested in pursuing the same role. According to Paxton himself, he told Neeson about the audition process and encouraged him to try out for the part, thinking that he was just being helpful to a fellow actor who might benefit from knowing about available work. However, Paxton's friendly advice ended up working against him in the most direct way possible, because Neeson took his suggestion seriously and decided to audition for the role himself. When Neeson met with Sam Raimi and the casting directors, They were immediately impressed by what Raimi described as his old Gary Cooper charisma and his ability to convey both strength and vulnerability, which were exactly the qualities they were looking for in their lead character. Neeson's audition was so successful that he won the role, leaving Paxton to watch his friend get the part that he had originally wanted for himself, all because he had been generous enough to share information about the casting process.